Good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in the exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is March the 24th. And it is the 83rd day of the year. 282 days remain to the year is over with. You know, today's National Cocktail Day, National Cheesecake Day, and I just had some, and it was outstanding. World Tuberculosis Day, National Chocolate-Covered Raisin Day. It's also Commonwealth Covenant Day, National Adverse Drug Event Awareness Day, National Eats Person as a Person Day, International Day for Achievers, Flatmates Day, Great British Spring Cleaning, and the Big Walk and Wheel, Tick Bite Prevention Week. And on that note, we're going to see what we got in the news. I've been asked, even though you all wanted me to do all the holidays observances, I've been asked to cut that short. There's so many of them, it's just unbelievable. Well, a lot of activist judges are overstepping their bounds and they're interfering with presidential authority. The Supreme Court's going to be asked to look at that. The one lunatic judge that's trying to stop deportations is, you have to wonder what his motivation is. Well, the Snow White movie that has been panned even by Snow White just tanked at the box office. The not-for-profit in Georgia that got a couple of $1 billion that seems to be connected to Stacey Abrams is going to be investigated by the IRS. Did it break the law? Well, trans-European travelers are warned by their country about coming into the U.S. amid Trump's two sexes order. Apparently, elsewhere in the world, there are multiple genders. Apparently, logic ends where Europe begins. Alina Habba, White House counsel, is going to get a top job at the Department of Justice. There is a shocking amount of bacteria released by microwave cooking. So shared microwaves could be a breeding ground for bacteria. Food safety experts can get involved. Things that we've taken for granted for eons are being upended now as more and more so-called medical experts rush to the front to give their opinions. Well, you know, Florida spring break has been a time of complete and total abandonment of the law. But the Florida spring break crowd got a rude awakening. There was a state crackdown on the partiers. Partygoers apparently spread a social media post promoting the unpermitted event on Sunny Isles Beach. And among those that showed up were law enforcement. Well, Jasmine Crockett, Democrat from Texas, has called for Elon Musk to be taken down. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, took a dim view of that. She says it's inciting violence. And my system has gone into business for itself at the moment. We'll see if it's going to give me back control of my own system. If I was of a paranoid frame of mind, I would think somebody's taking control of it. Well, former GOP Representative Mia Love, Republican of Utah, the first black Republican woman in Congress, elected in 2014, just died at age 49. Cancer. There's a staggering amount of money that's been discovered pouring into U.S. schools from overseas. Several of these universities that had major anti-Semitic movements, turns out, were funded by Middle Eastern countries. Surprise, surprise. There's a nearly 1.3 million Ford F-150s under investigation for reported unexpected gear downshifts. Ford's working with the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency to carry out this investigation. I drive a Ford F-150, but this only applies to 2015 to 2017 Ford F-150s. It can suddenly downshift. There have been 138 consumer complaints for the various model of this vehicle having unexpected, unrequested transmission downshifts to lower gear. There's no prior warning or any driver input. It just does it. Well, North Carolina's now is plagued by wildfires after being ravaged by Hurricane Helene. Bush area education secretaries worry about education department realigning it, she says, would detract from student achievement efforts. What nobody wants is all that free money that's handed out. They're putting a stop to that. Biden lands a coveted Othello Broadway ticket in the first major outing since he left office. The Othello opened on Broadway on Sunday night. And they were given ocular proof of the first public outing of former President Joe Biden and his wife Jill. It was seen in New York City on Sunday night to watch a modern retelling of William Shakespeare's tragedy. Surprising piece of information. Seems drinking dairy milk brings surprising benefits beyond just bone health. According to dietitians, there are 4 remarkable roles that dairy milk plays in good health. It's a rich source of essential nutrients that support overall health. Helps strengthen bones. Promotes growth and recovery. It has all 9 essential amino acids. Aids in hydration and nutrient absorption. Dairy milk's nearly 90% water, making it a hydrating beverage that delivers essential electrolytes such as potassium and magnesium. Provides immune system support. Consistent intake of milk or yogurt can help support a healthy immune system. And I think that is, well, that's the 4. Okay. Greenland Prime Minister condemns a visit from Usa Vance, the Vice President's wife. Called it a very progressive provocation. Well, Tesla dealerships and owners are still under attack. Let's see. There is a 23andMe has filed for bankruptcy as California Attorney General urges customers to delete their data. And co-founder Ann Rajokic has resigned. It's a $50 million company. It's trying to sell itself. Ivanka Trump is not exactly elated about Tiger Woods announcing a relationship with her former sister-in-law. American Idol hopeful that stunned the judges at the audition with an assist from her famous mother. Carney Wilson joined her daughter for the audition. Lolo Bonfiglio, the granddaughter of the Beach Boys' Brian Wilson and daughter of Wilson Phillips star Carney Wilson, appeared on Sunday's episode of American Idol. Never know who's going to show up. University of Pennsylvania lecturer who has been drawing, shall we say, controversial anti-Semitic cartoons of Jews drinking Gazan blood just lost his job. Laid him off. They claimed it was financial, but we all know that they don't want to get caught in that crossfire. Well, let's see. Bubba Wallace. Is in the crosshairs. NASCAR pulls a disgusting move with the Hooters girls. There's a big fight. And let's see. Anything else of any interest? Well, the bankruptcy of 23andMe is going to be a major issue with folks into family history. Well, we're going to be talking. Our main topic for this show, it's going to be unsolved mysteries. We're going to start out with an event that happened in 524 BC in the western desert of Egypt along the Libya border. Now, in those days, the big bully on the block was Persia. The emperor at the time was Cambyses II. He sent an army of 50,000, which was unheard of in those days, of his best Persian soldiers. And they vanished without a trace in the desert. 2,500 years later, a number of claims are made about the discovery of the remains of this expedition. He was the eldest son of Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Well, Cambyses hoped to expand the empire by conquering Egypt. So he employed Arab tribesmen to deposit caches of water across the Sinai Desert. And with that water to support his troop movement, moved his huge army into Egypt, defeated the last ethnically Egyptian pharaoh, Psammetichus III. And according to Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, who's the primary source for the information we have on the life of Cambyses, once he took over Egypt, he began making plans for further expeditions of conquest. Wanted to march west toward Carthage and south to Ethiopia, and into the desert to deal with the Ammonians, whoever they might have been. Now, the Ammonians were actually the inhabitants of the Siwa Oasis, a town deep in the western desert. It was very famous for the oracle of the Temple of Ammon. That was the Siwan name for the Egyptian god Ammon-Ra, who the Greeks equated with Zeus. According to Herodotus, Cambyses arrogantly failed to pay proper respect to the traditions of the years, in particular to the proud and powerful guardians of the Temple of Ammon, Well, as a result, have been divining unflattering oracles about him. Cambyses, who Herodotus called a despotic madman, decided to teach everybody a lesson. In 524 BC, he led his army south along the Nile en route to his Ethiopian expedition. He paused in Thebes to detach a force to send against the Ammonians. The Herodotus wrote in detail about this in Book 3 of his histories, and that is the sole source for one of the great historical mysteries of the ancient world. And I'm going to quote from that history. It said, when it came to in his march to Thebes, Cambyses detached 50,000 men from his army, directed him to enslave the Ammonians and burn the oracle of Zeus. He went on toward Ethiopia with the rest of his army. As for those who were sent in search of the Ammonians, they set out and journeyed from Thebes with guides, and it was known that they came to the city of Karga, an oasis inhabited by Samians, said to be of the Assyrian tribe, 7 days' march from Thebes across the sandy desert. Place is called in the Greek language the Isles of the Blessed. So it's said the army got that far. After that, except for the Ammonians themselves and those that heard from them, nobody knows anything about that 50,000-man force. They neither reached the Ammonians nor returned back. According to the Ammonians, when the Persians were crossing the sand from the oasis of Karga to attack them, and they're about halfway between Siwa and the oasis, while they were having breakfast, a great and violent south wind arose, which buried the entire army en masse in mountains of sand, and they vanished. Such is the Ammonian tale about that missing army. Well, from ardent archaeologists and all those who watched Raiders of the Lost Ark once too many times, the tale of the buried army in the desert's very tantalizing. Can you imagine what artifacts from that army would be worth on the open market? Well, and who knows what can be lying in the sands undisturbed for millennia and preserved by the sand and the arid conditions. Now, according to the mainstream view, the story is told by Herodotus is somewhat unreliable. Herodotus was both claimed as a father of history and reviled as a father of lies by other ancient historians. And as he himself pointed out, he's just repeating a tale he heard as he traveled through Egypt 70 years after that army disappeared. He paints a picture of Cambyses as a deranged drunk, capable of sending a huge army into the desert on a spiteful whim. Now, alternatively, Cambyses may actually have planned the attack on Silla as part of a cunning plan to approach Carthage to the west by an overland route, since the Carthaginians' Phoenician connection made the coastal route unusable. The expedition really did take place. Where would a lost army be sought? Well, the route described Herodotus as the army marching to Siwa from the oasis known as the Isles of the Blessed, which is today the town of Karga. In this case, they'd probably have followed the traditional caravan route through the oasis of Dakla and Farafra before meeting their end somewhere in the western desert. This area is a formidable waterless expanse. Includes rocky depressions, plains of salt and dust, enormous sand seas, and winds that drive the temperatures over 104 degrees, as well as periodic colossal sandstorms. Covers about 2/3 of modern-day Egypt, area of about 262,000 square miles. The combined size of Denmark, Greece, the Netherlands, Norway, Belgium, Switzerland, and Austria. Well, despite the dangers and the difficulties, intrepid explorers have crisscrossed the western desert looking for signs of this lost army. Maybe the most celebrated is the Austro-Hungarian pilot and desert explorer, Count Laszlo Almásy, the model for the English patient in the book and the movie of the same name. In the 1930s, Almásy was part of a crowd of mainly British desert exploration enthusiasts who called themselves the Zerzura Club, who were searching for Zerzura, the oasis of little birds known from medieval legends. Now, to the astonishment of the club, Almásy located this hidden oasis and turned next to a quest from the pages of his beloved Herodotus, the search for the lost army of Cambyses. Now, he'd earlier seen pottery shards that suggested to him the army might have buried caches of water jars to create artificial oases, as they had done when crossing the Sinai. But in the desert outside of Farafra, all he could find was a series of ancient cairns. Blasting desert wind blew up, and he was lucky to escape with his life. And then the outbreak of war prevented him from returning to pursue the quest. During more recent times, a steady trickle of reports have fanned excitement about that Cambyses' army might have been found. There was a 1977 claim that an Egyptian archaeological mission had discovered thousands of bones and swords and spears of Persian manufacture. Unfortunately, that turned out to be a hoax, while a widely reported 2000 claimed that a Royal Prospecting Helwan University geological team had stumbled upon similar remains came to nothing when it was thoroughly investigated. More highly regarded expeditions, such as the 1983 National Geographic-sponsored expedition led by Gary Chaffetz, found little more than sparse Roman remains and fields of sand dollars, fossil sea urchins that might have to give the illusion of human bones. 2014, leading university Egyptologist Olaf Kemper advanced the theory that the tale of the desert swallowing up the armies invented by Cambyses' successful Darius as propaganda to cover up the true fate of the troops. And according to this theory, the true fate of those troops was they were ambushed and defeated by Egyptian resistance leader Ptahibastis III, who briefly established a native-ruled kingdom based out of Memphis. There had been at least two expeditions that claimed to have located the lost army. It involved a character named Ali Barakat, who's been described as an Egyptian archaeologist, but he's been notorious for claiming that mounds found in Bosnia are ancient pyramids. He's been involved in at least two of the expeditions claiming to have found the lost army. In 2009, a trip with Italian brothers Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione produced a documentary showing them poking around a pile of bleached bones and displaying jewelry and metalwork of apparently ancient Persian origin. Of course, their claims are regarded as dubious, given that they're shocked documentary producers, and Egyptian authorities issued a claim specifically refuting their claims as unfounded and misleading. So what happened to 50,000 Persian soldiers? We really don't know. History is silent. But let me tell you, if you want to put them in the category of missing persons, every year, 100,000 plus people vanish into nothing. And that's just in the U.S. where we have such good records. How about elsewhere where we don't have the administrative army that we have in this country? That 100,000 may be 1 million. Who knows? But historically, we know that this 50,000 was part of Cambyses' army. And according to the records of Cambyses' army that we have available, he did detach a 50,000-man force. It was never heard from again. Well, on a smaller scale, sometime between 1587 and 1590, there was the disappearance of one of the earliest English colonies in America. And it's a tale of mystery and tragedy and conspiracy, strange codes, false tales and trails, and the obscuring sands of time. In the 16th century, rivers of gold and silver flowing from the New World threatened to overturn the balance of power in Europe. The Spanish Empire grew rich and powerful. Isolated and threatened, Protestant England nurtured colonial ambitions of her own. Companies of merchants and noblemen launched missions to explore and exploit and stake claims in North American territory. Among them was the syndicate put together by Sir Walter Raleigh, the Queen's favorite. 1584, Raleigh obtained a license to lands in the largely notional territories of Virginia. In 1585, he sent a force into Ralph Lane to establish the first English colony in the Americas. It was established on Roanoke Island, in what's now North America, North Carolina. Dwindling food supplies and hostile relations with most of the Native Americans led to the abandonment of the colony a year later. And a force of 15 men was left to maintain Raleigh's title, and those 15 men vanished, with evidence that they'd been killed or driven off. In 1587, a second wave of colonists arrived, led by John White, who served as official artist on the previous colonizing attempt. July 22nd, 1587, 90 men, 17 women, and 11 children came ashore at Roanoke Island. Although their original intent had been to set up on a more favorable territory on the mainland, Simon Fernandez, the captain in charge of the ships that brought them, refused to take them any further. He said he'd done everything he could. Since been alleged that Fernandez was in pay of Sir Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth I fight master and a court rival of Raleigh, and that Walsingham conspired at every step to thwart and doom the nascent colony. White's company set about rebuilding the colony, and just over a month later, his daughter gave birth to Virginia Dare, the very first English child born in the Americas. By this time, things were already going wrong. Poor relations with neighboring tribes led to the murder of one colonist. The settlers voted to send White back to England to secure more support and supplies, and August 27th, 1587, he set off, promising a swift return. Sounded with a trumpet a call, and afterwards many familiar English tunes or songs called to them to let everybody know they were friendly. But they couldn't find any sign of the colonists. All that was left behind was a palisade of timber that had been erected after White's departure and a few heavy lumps of metal. It looked like everything else had been packed up and moved. The only clues they found were two odd inscriptions. On a tree near the shore were the words C-R-O, or the letters C-R-O. And on one of the palisade timbers, somebody had carved the word Croatoan, or Croatoan. To White, the implication was clear. The colonists had gone to take refuge of the friendly tribe of Native Americans, the Croatoans of nearby Hatteras Island. They had left, as agreed, a secret token of their intent. They'd been in distress. The inscription was to have been included a Maltese cross, but no such cross was seen. In fact, the plan had always been for the colonists to move from Roanoke to a site 50 miles to the mainland. So as to find them gone wasn't in itself mysterious. Tragically for White, though, an attempt to visit Hatteras Island and search for his family and the other settlers was thwarted by storms, and eventually he was forced to return to England, never to see him again. Well, subsequent search parties, of course, were sent, and several were sidetracked, and none made positive contact. When the Jamestown colony was set up in Virginia, with some of my ancestors, I might add, further efforts were made, and John Smith, the leader of the new colony, gathered native accounts of white men encountered and killed around Chesapeake Bay. The hostile Native American chief Powhatan, Father Pocahontas, told him he'd attacked and killed a group of white men to the south. Showed Smith a musket barrel and a brass mortar and certain pieces of iron that had been the property of those white men he'd killed. Now, there were sporadic further attempts to locate the lost colony, and a theme developed of claimed encounters of what they called white Indians, familiar with the English and Christianity, while they assumed to be the descendants of the white company's intermarriage with their Native American host. Unfortunately, the validity of these claims is dubious, and the original colony on Roanoke Island has been lost under the shifting sands of time. So a mystery remains. What became of this lost colony? Now, some of it may well have followed the original plan to relocate to the mainland, to a site previously identified by Raleigh's explorers as a source of a valuable natural resource of sassafras, extracts of which had great value medicinally, and in brewing it, they could actually make a very nice root beer. Accounts of early explorers make much play of secret commodities at a secret location. And the paper trail of early maps and land titles leads precisely to a spot 50 miles into the mainland. Sassafras exploitation was probably the prime motive behind Raleigh's entire project, so it's highly plausible that the colonists moved to this secret location. In fact, a map by White himself suggests it may have been a Native American site at the head of the Alligator River, called Tarmascacooey. Now, the most widely accepted theory about the fate of the colonists is they intermingled with the Croatans and the combined group moved inland. Research undertaken by the Lost Colony Center for Science and Research using old land deeds suggests that Croatan descendants held title to land at a site called Gum Neck, which seems to correspond exactly to the site of Tarmascacooey, 50 miles inland from Roanoke. Now, while the mystery of the lost colonists may not be definitively solved, it seems that a plausible explanation has emerged about what happened to them, at least initially. Their long-term fate, of course, is very unclear. Were they all killed by Powhatan or others? Or are their descendants still around today? You know, the unsolved mystery of the colonists has generated a range of outlandish speculations. Inevitably, alien abduction is among them. More plausible theories include the conspiracy theory that Washington plotted to undermine Raleigh's colony. Lee Miller wrote a book called Roanoke, Solving the Mystery of the Lost Colony. It's also possible the Spanish captured the colonists. Roanoke Colony was a direct challenge to the Spanish colonialization of North America. The Spanish colony at St. Augustine in Florida got word of the English settlement. In 1588, a small expedition was sent north to look for and, if possible, destroy the Roanoke colony. That expedition came back empty-handed. The Spanish governor, of course, concluded the colony had failed or gone. Well, from missing colonies, let's talk about a missing room. It was originally known to be located in St. Petersburg, Russia, about 1701. Now, a priceless collection of exquisite amber panels making up one of Russia's most treasured artifacts was looted by the Nazis and never recovered. Its whereabouts remain one of the greatest art mysteries of the century. I'm talking about the infamous Amber Room, which dates back to 1701 Prussia, when an ambitious court sculptor and architect saw his chance to catch the eye of a young queen. Andreas Schluter had fallen out of favor with Queen Sophie Charlotte, the wife of Prussian King Frederick I, and was seeking a way to win back her patronage. In cellars at a royal palace, he stumbled upon a large store of amber, fossilized pine resin known as the gold in the north, traditionally collected on the Baltic shore of Prussia. He conceived the idea of making a room fitted out in amber in one of the palaces that Sophie Charlotte was having refurbished. He recruited master craftsmen who had the use of new methods of working with amber to accomplish his ambitious vision. Fragments of amber were heated and soaked in an infusion of honey and linseed and resin and molded into flat reliefs that could be pieced together like a mosaic or stained glass window on a backing of wood covered in gold or silver leaf. The intention was to create a set of panels and boards of amber that could be fitted together onto the walls of a room, together with other suitably magnificent ornaments, to create an unprecedented spectacle that would blaze with golden light. Well, the death of Queen Sophie Charlotte and Frederick I meant the project remained incomplete. 1716, Frederick William I gave the panels to the visiting Russian Tsar, Peter the Great, who was known to really love amber. Peter demonstrated his gratitude with a return gift of 55 giants. His regiment of men were all over 6 feet tall, and when the average height in those days was about 5'8", they were considered giants. Well, the room that he had been given was brought to the new city he had founded, St. Petersburg. Remained in storage till 1743, when Empress Elizabeth revived the project and had the room installed at the Third Winter Palace. Then it was moved to the Catherine Palace in Tsarskoye-Selo, a village outside St. Petersburg, home of several imperial palaces. Finally completed in 1770 by Catherine the Great. They added new panels and ornamentation, including four Florentine stone mosaics. Well, the Amber Room dazzled and awed visitors to the palace throughout the 19th century. It even survived the fall of the monarchy and the Russian Revolution. And along with other treasures of the imperial palaces, was displayed to the Russian people and cared for by curators until World War II. With the Nazis advancing rapidly toward Leningrad, as St. Petersburg was called in those days, head curator Anatoly Kuchumov was ordered to pack up what he could for evacuations to the east. Well, to his dismay, he couldn't find a way to take down the amber panels without breaking them, and in desperation had them covered with fake walls in the hope the Germans would pass over the greatest art treasure in Russia. Well, his ruse failed, and the Nazis quickly managed what Kuchumov had been able to do. They dismantled the room and shipped it back to Königsberg, ancient seat of the Teutonic Knights, and the Germans considered the spiritual home of the Amber Room. Here the Amber Room was displayed in Königsberg Castle till the Russians began to close in. That time it was packed up once more, and plans were made to ship it elsewhere for safekeeping. Well, on May 31st, 1945, just 3 weeks after the German surrender, and more than 6 weeks after the fall of Königsberg, Professor Alexander Brusov of the State Historical Museum in Moscow arrived in Königsberg to find out what had happened to the Amber Room. When he got there, he found the city in ruins and most of the castle a burned-out shell. Penetrating to the cellars of the castle, he discovered that an intense fire had swept through this part of the castle. Amid the ruins were the carbonized remains of 3 of the 4 Florentine mosaics from the Amber Room. But he couldn't find a single sign of the rest of the room. Evidence of the cellars looked bad, but Brusov was determined to explore all options. In new interrogations of the Germans who had worked at Königsberg Castle, the Amber Room had been packed up with the intention of shipping it off to a safer spot. Former curator of the castle's art collection led him to a bunker across town, but there was no sign of the room, and eventually he went back home with the gloomy conclusion the room had probably been destroyed in the castle fire. Just another casualty of war. But Kuchumov, the Catherine Palace curator who had looked after the room for so many years, refused to accept this conclusion. With KGB backing, he savaged Brusov's efforts and findings, destroyed the professor's career, and launched his own investigation in Königsberg. He uncovered evidence the Nazis had scouted locations in the Prussian countryside and Also, more distant parts of Germany as possible safe houses for the storage of looted art. Kuchermov followed the trail of the room to Berlin, but met with no success. And later on, he and other Russian investigators led by the KGB went again back to Königsberg. Over 4 decades, the former German city, now Russian enclave and naval base called Kaliningrad, is thoroughly explored, tunneled, excavated, and turned over. Unfortunately, no trace of the Amber Room could be found. Meanwhile, Germans from both sides of the Iron Curtain had joined the hunt, inspired by articles carefully placed in international press by communist intelligence agencies that insisted the room had survived the war and awaited rediscovery. After reading the articles and encouraged by his bosses who knew that repatriating the Amber Room would curry favor with their master in Russia, Stasi agent Paul Inca became an expert on all things to do with the Amber Room, eventually publishing a 1986 report, Bernstein-Zimmer report, the best-known book on the subject. He chased the room to various castle art depositories across East Europe and found the Soviets particularly uncooperative when it came to discussing important documents. Came away empty-handed, thoroughly convinced the answer was just out of his reach. Other clues and rumors have led to the Amber Room being sought in lakes and mines all over Europe, but the only traces ever been found are the fourth mosaic stolen from Leningrad by a Wehrmacht soldier in 1941, kept secret by his son till the late 1990s, as well as the chest of drawers stolen from the room before it left Russia. 2003, a replica of the Amber Room was installed at the Catherine Palace in Tsarskoye Selo to mark the 300th anniversary of the founding of St. Petersburg. It took over 20 years and more than 6.5 tons of amber to create, and was partially funded by German donations. Well, in 1999, British investigative reporters Catherine Scott Clark and Adrian Levy started a search for the fate of the Amber Room. They published the results of their search in their 2004 book entitled The Amber Room. After diligently tracing all the false leads and wrong turns taken by everybody from Kuchermov to Stein, they came to a startling conclusion. The evidence clearly suggested the Amber Room had indeed been destroyed by fire in the cellars of the Königsberg Castle in 1945, just as Brusov had feared. But this conclusion had been suppressed by Kuchermov, who didn't want to believe it, possibly for fear he'd be blamed for not taking down the panels and saving the room when the Nazis invaded. Well, the Soviet state gladly seized on Kuchermov's version because it served to cover up the unpalatable truth. The fire that destroyed the room had been set by Soviet troops engaged in an orgy of looting and destruction. Articles about the room are deliberate disinformation, and all the many KGB and Stasi investigations were merely smokescreens. In West Germany, strawberry farmer and amateur historian George Stein took up the hunt for the Amber Room. He'd previously helped to repatriate other art treasures to Russia. Suspect's letter purporting to be from an SS officer led him to believe the room had been shipped out of Königsberg to the old mining complex in Lower Saxony, although later searches proved to be fruitless. Over the next 25 years, the hunt for the room would destroy Stein's family. His wife committed suicide, his children disowned him, and eventually he lost his sanity. He supposedly disemboweled himself with a scalpel in mysterious circumstances in 1987, after having become convinced the room had been shipped off to America after the war. Well, certainly that was a possibility that was discussed many times in treasure hunting circles. Well, from missing rooms, let's talk about an unbelievably mysterious individual. His name was Kasper Houser. Supposedly born around 1828, died around 1853. He was an untraceable youth who appeared out of nowhere, claiming to have grown up in isolation. He became a celebrity, but he was killed in mysterious circumstances and left in an enduring, unsolvable enigma. He appeared in Nuremberg in 1828. He was apparently a feral boy whose past proved impossible to trace. became very famous, and the focus of suspicions he might be the lost heir of the great Grand Duke of Baden before being killed in mysterious circumstances. In fact, almost everything about Kasper Houser was mysterious. His origins, upbringing, abilities, his character, and demise. The entire matter was aptly summarized by the epitaph on his gravestone, which read, "Here lies Kasper Houser, riddle of his time. His birth was unknown, his death mysterious." And according to a 1996 estimate, he's been the focus of at least 3,000 books and over 14,000 articles. Well, the story actually began with the appearance of a short young man, estimated to be in his late teens, in the streets of Nuremberg, May 26, 1828. Speaking a rough dialect of Bavarian, he asked to be directed to the cavalry officer's household since he had letters addressed to the man. The letters claimed that their bearer was the son of an unnamed trooper who had been commended to the care of a poor peasant who, in turn, was now commending him to the care of the military. Well, in typical fashion for everything about the Kasper Houser tale, these letters became a source of controversy. It was suggested they were both written by a single hand, although this was countered by others who claimed that one of the letters was clearly a fake, written shortly before delivery because it was addressed to an officer in Nuremberg, even though the man in question had lived in the city in 1812, when the letter was supposedly written. Well, the boy could write his name, Kasper Houser, but appeared to have only a limited vocabulary. He was short, his legs were covered with scars, seemed relatively robust, though. Installed in the town jail for want of any place else to put him. He began to unfold a remarkable tale. Claimed to have been raised entirely without human contact in a small cell with boarded-up windows, fed only bread and water. But he could walk, was in decent health, and showed no signs of vitamin or sunlight deficiency. Given tuition for education, he learned to talk and read and write with a remarkable speed, belying the term of idiot or simpleton that had been first attached to him. Seemed to have unnaturally sharp senses. It was also claimed he could see in the dark, and he seemed to be hypersensitive to electricity as during a thunderstorm. But Lukasevich saw him awarded a small pension, and he became the subject of numerous pamphlets and newspaper articles as words of his mysterious origin spread. Even in 1829, there was an autobiography written with graphic details of his awful upbringing. Some of those charged with his care and education grew exasperated with what they saw as his increasing laziness and conceit, and his apparent uneasy relationship to truthfulness. Those are also the qualifications you need to be elected to Congress these days. Stories of Kasper's origins, particularly the luridly Gothic suggestion he was a true heir of a grand duchy, began to circulate. And if he didn't author these rumors, he seemed to enjoy and play up to them. In October 1829, at around the same time as his notoriety was beginning to dim, and after falling out with his guardians, he was found with a gash on his forehead. He claimed to have been inflicted by a mystery assailant, although many suspected he had inflicted the wound on himself. In April of 1830, after another falling out with another guardian, he suffered a mild self-inflicted gunshot wound. Supposedly, it was done by accident. Well, by now, Kasper Houser was internationally famous, and for a time was taken up by a visiting English nobleman, Philip Henry, Lord Stanhope, a friend of the Baden family. Stanhope encouraged Kasper to think he'd be taken back to England, but in fact, the Englishman appeared to have tired of him, left him in the care of a harsh schoolmaster in December of 1831. A year later, again following an argument with his guardian, Kasper was killed. It was December 14th. When he staggered in, clutching his side where a deep stab wound had pierced his lung and liver, and managed to gasp out the words, "Man, stab, knife, huff, garden, gave purse, go look quickly." When police later searched the Hofgarten Park, in which Kasper claimed to have been stabbed by an unknown assailant, they found a black wallet or purse containing a note written in mirror writing. That means you hold it up to the mirror to read it correctly. And it said, "Houser, be able to tell you how I look, where I came from, and who I am. Despairing from this task, I'll tell you myself. I'm from someplace on the Bavarian border. My name is MLO. 3 days later, Kasper died, and even his last words are considered enigmatic. He said, "Many cats are the death of the mouse. Tired, very tired. Still have to take a long trip." Well, his detractors claimed that Kasper Houser stabbed himself to win sympathy and attention, but misjudged and inflicted a fatal wound on himself. Supporters claimed that he had been assassinated by dark forces intent on suppressing the truth about his origin. Today, we still don't know. One popular theory about Kasper Houser was he was a child of Karl, Grand Duke of Baden, who had died in 1818. Apparently without surviving male issue after 2 sons died at birth, so his title passed to an uncle. Supposedly, a cunning aunt had swapped a dying peasant baby for Karl's healthy son Kasper, who was then reared in isolation, ignorant of his true patrimony. 2002 DNA analysis of samples from artifacts of Kasper Houser showed he might well indeed have been related to the House of Baden. But of course, such is the greedy nature of some people that what should have been never was. Well, the last story we're going to do today, before we run out of time, is probably well known to most people. It's the story of the Mary Celeste. It took place in 1872. It was an American brig found in the middle of the ocean, abandoned by her crew despite being seaworthy enough to sail around the world. Her name has since become a byword for mysterious disappearances. It's often misspelled as Mary Celeste. It began life in Nova Scotia in 1860 as the Amazon. Except for the long history of misfortune and tragedy. She had run aground, caught fire, gone through multiple captains, been associated with several bankruptcies and deaths. But she was salvaged, and because she was seaworthy, and 1868 was given a new name. By 1872, she was under the command of Benjamin Spooner Briggs, who also owned a share in the vessel. And in early November, he oversaw the loading in New York of a cargo of 1,701 barrels of alcohol for shipment across the Atlantic to Italy. Accompanying him on that fateful trip would be his wife and daughter, along with a crew of 7. Left New York on November 5th. None of the people on board would ever be seen again. Well, exactly 1 month later, on December 5th, the crew of the British ship Del Garcia spotted a vessel adrift in the Atlantic off the Azores. Her sails were tattered and in poor shape. After hailing the crew, they got no reply. So Captain Morehouse, the captain of the De Gracia, sent across a party to investigate. They searched the entire ship, from stem to stern, found not a soul on board. Even the ship's cat was gone. The ship itself was remarkably seaworthy. It had lost the foresail and the upper foresail. Been blown off. Both sails had been blown off their yards. But other sails are either stored, furled, or set. Some of the rigging was fouled or blown away, and some of the hatch covers had been taken off and tossed aside, although the main cover was still battened down. There wasn't much water swashing around in the hold, but there was plenty of barrels for drinking, and most of the provisions were intact and unspoiled. Didn't appear to be any reason for her to be abandoned. In the ship's log in Captain Briggs' cabin offered no explanation. The last entry in the log said Monday, November 25th, 5 o'clock, made island of St. Mary's, bearing east-southeast. 8 o'clock eastern point, bore south-southwest 6 miles. Distant. That was enough to what had happened to the crew, at least initially. The yawl, a small boat normally lashed to the main hatch, was missing, and part of the railing along one side of the ship had been removed, obviously in order for folks to launch the yawl. Also missing from the ship were the chronometer, the sextant, bill of lading, and navigation book. In other words, those are the items to be grabbed in the event of a herd abandonment. But this simply begged a far greater mystery. What would drive a captain to abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship in the middle of the ocean and jump into a small boat with a 7-man crew, his wife, and 2-year-old daughter? Well, Captain Morehouse set out across the skeleton crew to get the Mary Celeste back to Gibraltar. He knew he and his men would expect a rich salvage prize, especially given the excellent condition of the ship and its intact cargo. Unfortunately, these are precisely the factors that would get the men of the De Gracia into a maelstrom of accusation, suspicion, and persecution. British Attorney General in Gibraltar, Frederick Southey Flood, smelled a rat on learning of the particulars of the case. He suggested the crew of the Mary Celeste had gotten drunk on the cargo and murdered the captain and his family, but this theory floundered on the fact the cargo was of denatured or chemically altered alcohol and would cause violent sickness before intoxication. Then he said, well, maybe Morehouse and his crew were guilty of murder and piracy, and although they were eventually cleared of all suspicion, Flood's antics had succeeded in publicizing the mystery of the Mary Celeste far and wide. Newspapers picked up the story. In 1884, became the subject of a popular short story, J. Habakkuk Jefferson's Statement, one of the earliest works of Arthur Conan Doyle. He misspelled the ship's name as Mary Celeste, and although fictional, his version of the story is widely repeated as a factual account. July of 1887, the U.S. Consul in Gibraltar, Horatio Sprague, wrote that the case of the Mary Celeste is startling since it appears to be one of those mysteries with no human ingenuity can penetrate sufficiently to account for the abandonment of the vessel and disappearance of his master, family, and crew. Human ingenuity has nonetheless made many attempts to penetrate that mystery. Discounting the more far-fetched theories, it's obvious that what needs explaining is not the question of how the crew came to leave the ship. Clearly they got into the small boat, but why they would leave the ship. Presumably they thought the ship was in danger and the yawl was the safest option. Cargo of alcohol was an obvious threat if the crew believed that the fumes had leaked out and might be about to ignite and cause an explosion. Naturally, they would abandon the ship. One theory is the ship was hit by a waterspout. A small tornado led to a sudden drop in pressure above decks. This might have caused the smaller hatches to pop off, fooling the crew into believing the expanding alcohol vapor was to blame. That would also explain the disappearances of the hatches. Alternatively, the falling pressure could have caused a malfunction in the gauge that showed water level in the hull, making it appear the ship had taken on masses of water when it hadn't. Modern-day sea captain David Williams has a theory the Mary Celeste was hit by waves of an undersea quake, and this panicked the crew into abandoning ship. Whatever may be the reason, the crew scrambled into launch and board the yawl, pausing only to grab essential navigation equipment. Any relief they felt on seeing the ship wasn't exploding or sinking would have been short-lived, because presumably the line holding them to the Mary Celeste broke for some reason, leaving them to perish at sea. May 16, 1873, a newspaper in Liverpool reported 2 rafts had washed ashore on the coast of Spain, to which were lashed corpses and an American flag. Although this wasn't investigated at the time, it later suggested these were the last remains of the crew of the Mary Celeste. The ship itself lived on for more than a decade, making multiple crossings in the Atlantic, although maintaining her reputation as a jinx ship. 1885, she was run aground and burned by her last owner, Gilman Parker, as an insurance fraud. Although he escaped conviction on a technicality, the curse of the Mary Celeste seemed to have caught up with him as he died in poverty and disgrace. Early in the 20th century, a popular theory attributed the disappearance of the crew to the depredations of a giant octopus, a kraken, or some similar sea monster. Later on, the kraken was replaced by aliens, with the now popular theory the crew of the Mary Celeste were abducted by aliens. Another culprit blamed as a vortex or strange force of Bermuda Triangle, although this hypothetical area doesn't in fact extend as far as the Azores. None of these theories explain why the yawl, navigation instruments, ship's papers went missing. And on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. And once again, you'll be listening to the Ken Hudnall and the Ken Hudnall Show. Until then, have a truly great evening.